Who are the Baltimore Ravens' ideal playoff matchups, and what are the scenarios for the Ravens as playoff time rolls around? We talk about that, continuing to recap the Ravens' Week 16 win over the Falcons and more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher, Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for tuning in with us today and making us your first listen. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms, including over on YouTube. So be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We are so close to 3,000 subscribers. That is our next goal here on Locked On Ravens. So subscribing is free, so I highly recommend you do so. We are daily putting out 5 days a week Ravens content, so news, analysis, updates, and more. We're also in audio form, so it's the same show, both audio and video. So if you're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere, we have you covered Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. And here today, we're going to be diving into the Ravens playoff situations, scenarios, and potential opponents for the Ravens and which one of those opponents would be ideal for them. Now, the Ravens have already clinched a playoff spot. The scenarios we're going to be talking about aren't how can they get in, because they already got in. In fact, there were actually multiple ways they could have gotten in week 16, and multiple things happened. The one that everybody's talking about is how the Ravens won and then the Jets lost and the Patriots lost. But there were also a string where even if the Ravens lost in week 16, they still would have gotten in because they needed like 5 teams to win or lose, and each one of those teams did what the Ravens needed them to do. So Baltimore's in, that's settled. But in terms of other scenarios, how would Baltimore get the 3 seed? Could they get the 2 seed? Could they get the 1? Could they fall to 7 or 6 or 5? So what would those scenarios be over these last 2 weeks? We'll talk about those in the first segment. Then in the second segment, we'll move more into actual opponents. So who would it be ideal for Baltimore to face in the first round, in the wild card round? Or maybe they'll have that bye if they're the number 1 seed. So we'll talk about that in the second segment. Then in the final segment, we'll continue talking about that Ravens 17-9 win over the Falcons, recapping it a little bit more, talking about more observations and notes and stuff like that. So let's dive into first scenarios for the Ravens. Now, obviously, Baltimore, they're going to be fighting for the AFC North. The next business for the goal for them, the next one is to win the AFC North. Baltimore, honestly, to put it pretty simply, all they really need to do is win and they're in, right? Well, win and they win. Win and they win the North. The Ravens control their own destiny here. If they beat Pittsburgh in week 17 and beat Cincinnati in week 18, they automatically win the North. The key thing there, though, is, as I talked about yesterday, made a pretty big deal about it, was the fact that the Ravens, their season is likely going to come down to week 18. There are only a couple. In fact, I think there's only one where the Ravens wouldn't win the North if they were to beat Cincinnati in week 18. And that is if Baltimore were to lose to Pittsburgh in week 17, and if Cincinnati were to beat Buffalo in week 17. That would obviously, I have the handy dandy ESPN playoff simulator here. So we're going to be doing it live here on the show. I know I've done like a couple live mock drafts. We're going to be simulating these matchups live. So if the Ravens were to lose to Pittsburgh, and then if the Bengals were to beat Cincinnati, that would put the Bengals at 11-4, or the Bengals at 12-4, excuse me, and Baltimore at 10-6 with 1 game to go. So with Cincinnati at 12-4 and Baltimore at 10-6, you can't make up 2 games in 1 game. So that would actually move Baltimore to the 5th seed, and that would be their spot in the wild card. But if we do these other games, so let's say Tennessee beats Dallas, we'll say Jacksonville beats Houston, Kansas City beats Denver. We'll give the Patriots the win over the Dolphins here. I'm only going to do AFC stuff. So Cleveland beats Washington. We'll say the Jets beat Seattle. We'll say the Chargers beat the Rams. This would put Baltimore at the 6th seed. Cincinnati would move up to the 2. So then it would all come down to week 18 for where would Baltimore play wild card wise. So let's say Baltimore wins week 18, right? They move up to the 5th seed. That pushes Cincinnati down to 3. And that would move the Jets into playoff picture here. So if you're looking at what the Ravens could do, they have to beat Pittsburgh in week 17 if they want to have a shot to win the North, unless they are also banking on the Bengals losing to the Bills. And, you know, there's a real chance the Bengals would lose to the Bills, but there's a real chance that Cincinnati wins against Buffalo. So the big thing for the North is if the Ravens and Bengals both win in week 17, they're playing for it in week 18. If the Ravens and Bengals both lose in week 17, they're going to be playing for it in week 18. Even if the Ravens win and the Bengals lose, they're still going to be playing for it in week 18 because the Ravens would still have the tiebreaker advantage. Both teams would be 11-5. But then obviously if Cincinnati beats the 11-5 Ravens as an 11-5 team, then the Bengals have the 1-game advantage there. But could the Ravens actually get the 1 seed? We're going to find out here together. So let's say, obviously, Baltimore, you have the Bills right now are the 1 seed. They're at 12-3. Kansas City is the 2 seed. They're at 12-3. Baltimore right now is 10-5. So in terms of actual tiebreakers, Baltimore, you would have to have the Ravens. They beat Pittsburgh in week 17. They beat Cincinnati in week 18. Even if Buffalo loses, so we'll say Buffalo loses to Cincinnati in week 17, and we'll say they lose to New England in week 18. And let's say Kansas City, we'll do it with Kansas City as well. Kansas City will say loses to Denver, which just fired Nathaniel Hackett, so I'm not sure about that one. And then we also have in week 18, them losing to the Raiders. It would push Buffalo up to the 1 seed and Baltimore to the 2 because Buffalo has the tiebreaker over Baltimore. So the Ravens could get the 2 seed, but it's not looking like they can get the 1 because Buffalo, even if they lost their 2 games and Baltimore won, because Buffalo beat Baltimore in week 4, they have the head-to-head tiebreaker, which puts them ahead for the 1 seed. Now, Cincinnati can actually, I believe, get the 1 seed if they were to win both their games. So if they were to beat the Bills and if they were to beat the Ravens, then you would have them at 13-4. Buffalo will go down to 2, and then the Ravens would actually be pushed down to 5 there. Now, can Baltimore get the 7 seed? Because they're in, right? The lowest they can go is, well, we're going to find out, but the lowest they can go hypothetically is 7. So we'll say they lose to Pittsburgh, they lose to Cincinnati. Now, for the Dolphins, you would have to have the Dolphins end up beating the Jets in week 18, and you would have to have them beating the Patriots. That would move them to 10-7. But Baltimore, they would be 11-6 here. Now we'll move them down. They could be the 7 seed if they were to lose both their games. Miami would win both their games in this situation. So they can still get down to the 7 seed here, which it's not a huge deal. But obviously, the main thing you want for them, it would be so huge for them to have a home playoff game. Or I know a lot of people are talking about matchups. We'll talk about the matchups in the second segment. But it's so simple for them where they can control their own destiny and win both these games. Or they can beat Pittsburgh, if they can beat Cincinnati, they can go as high as the 2 seed because Buffalo to end the year, if we're talking about how they can get to the 2 seed, Baltimore has to win both their games and then they can actually go. If Kansas City loses now, again, is Kansas City going to lose to Denver and is Kansas City going to lose to the Raiders? It's not a high likelihood that's going to happen, but it is possible. But I do think the most likely scenario for Baltimore is probably either the 3 seed or the 5 seed. There is still a chance they would be able to get the 6. There are a lot of teams right now that are hovering right around that 10-5, 9-6. Right now Baltimore's 10-5. The Chargers are 9-6, and the Dolphins are 8-7. You also have teams on the outside looking in, like the Patriots and the Jets, who are 7-8. So it feels like the Ravens are going to be anywhere from the 3 seed, the 5 seed, or the 6 seed based off of if they win or if they lose over these last 2 weeks. But they do have an opportunity to go anywhere. So the 4 seed is locked into the AFC South winner. So whether that is Jacksonville or Tennessee. So there's no shot Baltimore can end up getting the 4 seed. But if the Ravens win the North, they will most likely be in that 3 seed. If they lose the North, they will probably be in the 5 to 6 area. So there's a lot that goes into these playoff scenarios: head-to-head record, conference record, divisional record. That's why it was so important for the Ravens to, in some of the losses, right? It was really important for them to beat Buffalo. They didn't do it. Really important for them to beat Miami. They didn't do it. And then you have those big wins where they have those tiebreakers right now, such as the Bengals and a couple of other opponents that, you can look back to the early stages. And we've talked about this where the last couple of weeks of the season, we're going to look back on some of those games and say, man, they could have really beat that Dolphins team, or they could have really beat that Buffalo team, maybe even non-conference games like the Giants, man, they could have really beaten the Giants, or maybe they pick up that divisional win against the Browns, right? Those types of things where you're thinking, if only they could have done it, they could have been in a better position. But Right now, they are in the thick of it. They are in the playoffs. That is important, and that is really what counts to be able to get them into the big dance. But now, it's where are they going to fall? What's their track going to look like as we head into Week 17 here, where Baltimore faces off against Pittsburgh on Sunday night? Coming up here, though, we'll be talking about the ideal playoff opponents, playoff matchups for the Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is sponsored by Ultimate Football GM, and I'm really excited to tell you about our new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. And if you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your football franchise, your dream can come true. This game is definitely for you. You can manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for things like hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, and navigating your franchise through free agency in the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. And you have all this in a challenging, realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And we have a little competition going on with our Locked On NFL hosts, and you could do the same with your friends, and you can get everybody in a group and play the game together. Locked On Ravens listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure to check it out today. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Taco Tuesday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Thank you so much again for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen of the day. But now let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens and their playoff opponents, well, potential playoff opponents. We got into some scenarios in that first segment, but there are a lot of teams that Baltimore could be matched up with depending on where they finish. Now, seems pretty unlikely the Baltimore would be matched up. Well, a lot depends, but seems pretty unlikely they'd see Kansas City in the first round. Seems pretty unlikely they'd see Buffalo in the first round. Although I think there's much more of a possibility they see Buffalo as opposed to Kansas City. I think Kansas City probably finishes as the 1 seed unless something crazy happens. And look, this is the NFL. Crazy stuff can happen. But in terms of other playoff opponents, let's say Baltimore does win the North. So they take care of their business, right? They beat Pittsburgh. They beat Cincinnati. Then you're looking at the Ravens, maybe they would play the Chargers. Maybe they would play the Dolphins. Maybe the Jets sneak in there. And we'll say Baltimore in this scenario is the 3 seed. So in looking at some of these teams, we'll start with the Chargers. Very talented roster. I know right now they are, they're a 9-6 football team. They've had ups and they've had downs this year. A couple of really close losses, really close wins as well. Now the Chargers, this is a team that excels passing the football. And even then, they're not really great. You have Justin Herbert there. You have the check down threat of Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They have a very high-powered unit, but they're only 16th in net yards per attempt. And then defensively, they're only 20th in net yards per attempt given up. And the kicker in all this is the fact that the Chargers are one of the worst running teams in the NFL. And this is before the Monday night game. I think these stats were, but the Monday night game wasn't necessarily super inspiring for either side. But regardless, the Chargers, 3.7 yards per attempt. That is second to last in the entire NFL. You also have the rush defense giving up 5.3 yards per carry. That is second worst. So they are 31st in rush offense, 31st in rush defense. That to me, that sounded like a matchup. I know they have high profile players, both offensively and defensively, but they just haven't been able to put it all together. And so I think that, they've hit their stride a little bit. They picked up some big wins, but I think with the way the run game is playing for the Ravens, with the way that the run defense is playing with the Baltimore Ravens right now, I think that's a real recipe. If you can make the Chargers one-dimensional, if they could play that game at home, it'd be if they win that game, it'd be revenge for the 2018 wild card loss. But again, I do want to preface this by saying there's a whole new season that starts when the playoffs start, right? You can never count any team out. Everything starts from scratch. It's like everything is a new season. So the Chargers could stifle the Ravens. The Ravens could stifle the Chargers. It all goes both ways. But I would say I'd be completely all right with Baltimore facing off against the Chargers. I think that is a very winnable game for them if they get that, especially at home. Then you have some of the other stragglers, like the Jets are a team that I think would be a good matchup for the Ravens. Their offense, the way the Jets offense is playing has not been great. Obviously, Zach Wilson has not been the answer for them this year. Maybe it'd be, if it's not Mike White for them, what a story it'd be if you have Joe Flacco coming back to M&T Bank Stadium to face off against his former team in the wild card round. But their pass offense, the Jets 24th in the league, yards per attempt, they're 22nd in the league rushing. So I think that's a pretty good matchup for the Ravens defense. I'm pretty sure they could hold the Jets to maybe one, if not no touchdowns on the day. But the Jets defense is very, very good, led by Sauce Gardner, a couple other really nice players, CJ Mosley on that defense. They have players there. They are the 5th best pass defense, the 6th best rush defense. That defense is no joke. So Baltimore would have to figure some stuff out offensively. Can they get the red zone offense on track? Can they get the play calling issues and play clock issues down? Can they get execution issues down? It all would come down into one big thing. I think the Jets is a winnable matchup, but I think it would be that ground and pound, rough and tough game where the Ravens, I think, would win it. But I think that it'd more come down to the defenses as opposed to the offenses in that situation. Then you have the curious case of the AFC South. There is a real shot that whoever wins the AFC South is not going to let the team that loses it into the big dance. As you have right now, the South looking really, it's not that great. I mean, Jacksonville is 7-8 and Tennessee is 7-8, but Jacksonville has the head-to-head tiebreaker, so they are currently in the division lead. So there is a real shot that either Jacksonville or Tennessee doesn't make the playoffs, and whoever does win the AFC South will be the only team representing. Now, it is interesting because I think the better matchup I think Jacksonville is one of those like dark horse playoffs teams that can really make some noise. They're hitting their stride. They've upset teams a little bit. So you're thinking, maybe. But Tennessee, even with Ryan Tannehill out, you'd be facing off against Malik Willis. Now, Tennessee's rush defense is very good. They are the number 2 rush defense in the NFL, giving up just 3.5 yards per carry right now. The pass offense has not been great. They're 25th in the league. Tennessee's rush offense has been meh. They're 16th, so right in the middle, 4.5. But with Derrick Henry, we all know how that went in 2019, and I will just leave it at that. But the pass offense, 20th. I just think that the Ravens, they can beat Tennessee because I think that they can get to Malik Willis. They can rattle Malik Willis. And even if they ride out Derrick Henry, I still think Baltimore has much more defensive firepower this year. The defense has just been on another level this year. Have they been perfect? No, but I still think Tennessee would be a good playoff matchup for them. Even Jacksonville, I still think would be a good matchup for them, but they are hitting their stride. It feels like Trevor Lawrence is playing great. The Jaguars have the 11th best passing offense, 6th best rushing offense. Their pass defense is not good. They are 27th in the NFL, but their rush defense is a top 10 unit at 9th. We saw it. Like, the Jaguars are a good team. And, you might not know everybody on their roster. Like, Christian Kirk has been great. Zay Jones, Marvin Jones. They have Travis Etienne there. But Trevor Lawrence has turned a corner over these last couple of months. And is exactly what Jacksonville Jaguars fans have wanted to see. The defense is starting to play a little better now. So I do think that that'd be a tough matchup. I still think the Ravens would win that game, regardless of if they win the North and it's a home game for them, or if they lose it and they have to go on the road and play that 4 or 5 matchup. Either or, for Tennessee or Jacksonville, I still think those are both matchups the Ravens can win. There also is a chance that Baltimore plays Cincinnati in the playoffs. Like, if Baltimore wins the North and then Cincinnati is the 5 or something, or if the Bengals win the North and the Ravens are the 6 or something, they could have that. But the Bengals, I think, they're an interesting matchup for them. The Bengals offense is super high powered. They did just lose Leo Collins to a torn ACL and MCL, but their pass offense has hit their stride. Joe Burrow's playing lights out. T. Higgins, they have Jamar Chase obviously there as well. 9th best pass offense, 18th best pass defense. So pass defense is in the middle. But the rush offense has not been great. They're 28th in the league in rush offense. It has gotten better. I mean, when the Ravens were playing them, I think they were averaging like 3.2 or 3.4 yards per carry as a team, so it's gotten better. The rush defense is a top 10 unit. DJ Reader has been one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL, if not the best defensive lineman in the NFL. He is a game wrecker. So there are multiple opponents that could give the Ravens a run for their money, but I'm not counting out the Ravens in these matchups. Like, I think they can beat all the teams I just listed. I think the toughest one out of those teams would be Cincinnati. Again, I don't think they'd be playing the Chiefs. I don't think they'd be playing the Bills in the first round. Maybe they'd play the Patriots. That's another team that you could look at. And, I'll pull up their stats too, but I don't think that they're necessarily a team. They've been tough, but again, for Mac Jones, Mac Jones is not scaring me if I'm the Ravens defense. They were able to take it to Mac Jones in the first match, but the Patriots defense is really, really, really good. 6th in the NFL in pass defense, 8th in the NFL in rush defense, but the pass offense right now, while it is 13th, The rush offense has been 21st. They have guys like Ramondre Stevenson, and they have receivers such as Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar, but those receivers are like, they're not necessarily doing a ton. Jacoby Myers is their top guy. He's really good, but I still think that Baltimore would win that matchup. But again, there's a whole new season come playoff time. And I don't know. I think for me, the most ideal playoff matchup, I'm going to go out on a limb. Well, obviously, the Jets are like number one. I think that the Ravens would beat the Jets. I think they would beat the Chargers. I'm going to say that I think Tennessee would be one of the more ideal ones for the Ravens, but you have to look at everything. You have to look at history. This is also going to be January football, so I think they're all going to be ground and pound games, but there are plenty to look at, or there is plenty to look at when you're talking about these opponents overall. And there'll be a lot more clarity for the Ravens as we get in to week 18 and after we see the results for week 17 in that action. But for now, there are plenty of opponents Baltimore could play, all very formidable opponents, but ones that I think Baltimore absolutely does have a shot against. But again, if they cannot clean up the red zone issues, if they cannot get the play calling issues right, if the defense, if they have the ball moved up and down on them and the red zone defense falters, then those are games the Ravens can easily lose as well. So plenty goes into playoff football, whole new season, but it's a very exciting whole new season nonetheless. Coming up, though, in our final segment, we'll be diving into a little bit more of a review of the Ravens and Falcons Week 16 matchup. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. And again, my fantasy run is officially over, unfortunately. We moved to fantasy basketball. Now I'm undefeated in fantasy basketball. But if you want a different twist on fantasy, be sure to check out PrizePicks. PrizePicks has a ton of current entries you can have. They have a lot of games and formats you can play as well, and it's super easy to use. How it works is you pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go score more or less in their PrizePicks projection, you can manage with 10 times the money on your entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just U-burst rejections available. PrizePicks offers rejection on any sport that you watch, including the NFL, the NBA, the MLB. You have NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and so much more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens here on Tuesday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. And the Ravens won. They won in Week 16 against those Atlanta Falcons. And I do just want to dive into a few more observations and notes from that game. 17-9 was the score of the game. Baltimore improves their record to 10-5. That elusive 10th win. They're actually 5-2 at home this year. They've played decently well at home overall. Now, the story was Tyler Huntley in this game, who was 9-17, 115 yards and a touchdown. He also ran the ball 11 times for 26 yards. And the story for Huntley was the fact I think that he was better in this game in terms of decision making. There were still a couple where you're thinking, maybe not. And his stats obviously do not pop off the page. And the history of Tyler Huntley games says that you have to win those games with the run game and the defense, with Huntley kind of managing the game a little bit, playing to his strengths, and hopefully not making mistakes. Huntley had multiple turnovers in that Cleveland game. He did a much better job of protecting the football in this one. No turnovers. He did fumble, but, no turnovers for the Ravens in this game, which was very fortunate for them. This was a close game. It was a lot, I think, closer than the score even indicated, with the fact that the Falcons were 0 for 4 in the red zone. Baltimore not much better. Baltimore 1 for 4. But this was a game, again, you won it with the ground game. Gus Edwards 11 for 99. J.K. Dobbins 12 for 59. They averaged 5.4 yards per carry as a team. I'd say better situational play calling from Greg Roman. Still not perfect, as we talked about on yesterday's show, where there were some design runs with Tyler Huntley when he probably just could have handed the ball off to Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins. Again, Tyler Huntley, I think, is still an ideal backup quarterback for Lamar Jackson based off of his skill set and even his talent as well. But he's not Lamar Jackson. He's not that same dynamic athlete, even though he does have athletic ability. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to shade him or anything. But, Lamar Jackson is a starter for a reason. Tyler Huntley's the backup for a reason. I think that is completely okay. Also, other situational stuff where the Ravens had an opportunity to run the clock out, and the Ravens are throwing on 2nd and 9 and stuff, putting them in 3rd and 9 situations where they, get yourself into a 3rd and medium, 3rd and short by using a ground attack that was working for you. So those are some of the things I know frustrated some fans throughout the course of the last couple of minutes. of the game. But hey, the Ravens, they score their first touchdown in the first, second, or third quarter in a little bit. In fact, it's been very few and far in between. And their first touchdown from a wide receiver. Welcome back to the party to Marcus Robinson, who again scored the Ravens' first touchdown by a wide receiver since week 3. They had 4 all season, and that was obviously came in the first 3 weeks. They now have 5. So maybe a little bit of a trend, hopefully for the Ravens. You also have Sammy Watkins coming back to the party, a 40-yard reception that he and Tyler Huntley hooked up for. So he's going to be a big player down the stretch for them, even if it is in those little spurts. But just to be able to get those big plays, the Ravens have not had a ton of those big passing plays, especially with Tyler Huntley under the center for them. Earlier in the season, we saw the amazing long throws from Lamar Jackson to Rashad Bateman. There were a couple to Devin Duvernay as well. Those are the types of plays that can stretch out a defense, open up the field, and can really help your run game out too, because teams aren't going to be able to stack the box if you're hitting on these deep or even intermediate passing plays. They can't cheat up. They can't put an extra defender. They can't bring the safety down to the line. They have to respect that. So while Tyler Huntley is not the best deep ball passer in the world, in fact, it's one of the weaknesses of his game, I still think connecting on those long passes, and it's not, Tyler Huntley doesn't have to air the ball out 50 or 60 yards. You can throw an intermediate play and hope that the receiver can take it for 20, 30 extra yards. But you also have players like Deshaun Jackson and like Sammy Watkins that can help you out there overall. I think defensively for the Ravens wasn't a perfect game for them. I mean, the Falcons, although they averaged 4.8 yards per play, they ran 17 more plays than the Ravens did, but they were getting down in the red zone. It was the bend don't break defense that really was able to help Baltimore out. And also, I know the refs helped out Baltimore a couple of times in this game as well. But as I said on yesterday's show, the way the Ravens have been officiated this year, they deserve to have some of that officiating luck go back in their favor. So the Ravens, they hold the Falcons to just 3 field goals on the day, but it is a game where you would like to have seen a little bit more. Oh, we're going to have the Falcons go 3 and out here. We're going to have them do this. But hey, credit to Atlanta. Desmond Ridder made some throws, and Drake London made some really great catches. Tyler Algier had some great runs, but Roquan Smith led his team 15 total tackles. He was all over the place. Marlon Humphrey, the signature fruit punch out, which we've missed that one. I've missed that one for a while. I'm really excited that we were able to see that one. Hopefully that is a sign of things to come. Baltimore has been a much better turnover defense this year, getting the ball out, getting the ball back to their offense. And it can be a momentum shifter, a game changer when you talk about turnovers. And so as we get into week 17, week 18 in the playoffs for the Ravens, if the Ravens can get even if it's 1 turnover, but if you're getting maybe 2 or even 3 on a good day, that just helped your offense out. It helped obviously your defense out in so many different ways. So fruit punch, he got that ball out, and the Ravens were able to get the ball back. So that was one of the highlights of the day for the defense. But yeah, I know that people are looking. The Ravens also had just 1 penalty on the day for 6 yards. Very clean game for them overall, which I thought was really great. We saw bursts from Gus Edwards, bursts from J.K. Dobbins. We saw Humphrey being Humphrey. We had some good play from Brandon Stevens in there, Travis Jones, and Broderick Washington, and Justin Madubuike making up for guys like Marcus Peters and Calais Campbell missing the contest overall. So I thought that it was a solid win. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There are definitely things, John Harbaugh said they do a lot of things well, but they can improve everywhere. So I agree with that. They can get better, but I think a win is a win. Obviously, that's the number one thing you'll want to know each and every week. Baltimore did that. Obviously, still some stuff to clean up as you head into these final 2 divisional matchups. But for now, Baltimore is 10-5. Still have a shot at that AFC North. Again, win, and you're in. So that is the path for Baltimore to win the AFC North here. That's all I have here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we're diving into more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.